Well, today's guest has written and created some of your and my most beloved shows, from Veep, The Thick of It, Alan Partridge. He's at it again, this time on stage and screen, with his adaptation of Dr Strangelove. I'm dying to talk about this. It's hitting the West End, taking it by storm already. His latest TV show, The Franchise, getting rave reviews. It's all looking very golden for the man with a golden touch. It's Armando Iannucci. Armando, welcome. Nice to see you.
Hi.
And thanks for being here.
I feel quite nervous now. Who is this person?
Who is this man? Don't you of all people cannot suffer from imposter syndrome, do you?
I suffered until recently from imposter syndrome. I don't know whether it's being, an Italian in Scotland, a Scot in England, and for some time doing Veep, a Brit in America. But I always felt like I was one foot in and one foot out, really, slightly involved and slightly standing at the back watching, which might have been a good thing. I don't know. But there's always that part of you that just thinks, well, we got away with that one. Maybe the next one will be the one where they find me out. And it did take me quite some time to overcome that, possibly by just talking about it to other people who also said, yes, I feel the same. Yes. And then you realise everyone feels that way.
Yes, yeah. You're not a Catholic by any chance, are you?
No, that comes into it, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure, yes.
There's an element of that.
Why do you raise that heady subject?
Yeah, well, of course, but it's just, or an Irish thing. How are you with the compliment?
I'm a kind of all shucks in that actually inside, of course I love it, but I think it's like rude to kind of show that, so I go, well, thank you very much.
Okay, well, look, on behalf of so many people like myself who've been watching your work output for the last 20 years plus, thank you, because what you do has brought just joy.
A pleasure, and it is a genuine pleasure, because I don't get besieged by people. I think about once a month someone, not the same person, but on average, someone comes up and just says, thanks for all the laughs. And I think, well, that's nice. If I get that once a month,
okay,
that's my pension.
Can I be your once a month?
Okay.
This week.
I now have to wait till November for the next one. But
then it's Christmas. Great. You'll get a few, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and we'll look at some of the back catalogue in due course, but let's talk about Dr Strangelove, because for those who don't know, of course, it was this famous film, and Peter Sellers was the star, and he played a few parts in it. Why don't you give us the elevator pitch, as it were?
So, great director Stanley Kubrick, he brought this film out in the early 1960s, not long after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the whole world was living in fear of the nuclear war that everyone thought America and the West would be having with the Soviet Union, as it then was. And it's a comedy. Peter Sellers plays three characters: the President of the United States, President Muffley, Colonel Mandrake, a very English RAF officer who's seconded to the US military, and Dr Strangelove, who is this weird German we don't know what his past is, but it's very suspicious.
Probably
scientist.
An army man of some sort, yes.
And it's this great comedy that between these three characters and the three locations they're in, sees how a rogue general in the US military sends American planes into Russia to prevent what he calls a sneak attack. And when everyone says, well, there's no evidence, he says, yes, that's because it's sneaky. And it then sets a whole chain of procedures in motion that everyone finds it impossible to stop. So they're staring at kind of all-out nuclear war within hours. Yes. And weirdly, it's very funny.
Yes, but that's you. You find the humour in the absurd and the dark, and that's where I find it sometimes, I'm sure you do, as I know you do, that in the darkest corners comes often the funniest humour.
Well, they talk about gallows humour. I did a film, The Death of Stalin, which was very much based around the events that really did take place when Stalin died in the Soviet Union, and among our research, we found there were Stalin joke books. There were jokes about Stalin written down, and you circulated these joke books. But you could be shot if somebody reported you for telling a joke. And yet somehow, when I spoke to people who grew up under that regime, they said somehow humour was required. It helped you process what was going on, but it also meant he hadn't shut your brain down. He hadn't shut your emotion down. If you could still laugh at him, then he hadn't got you. Even if you were locked up, even if he'd taken away your work, if you could still laugh, there was still some spirit in you.
Interesting. So he could scare you, he could panic you, he could terrorise you, but he couldn't take away your sense of humour.
No, and that's why tyrants and autocrats don't like jokes about themselves. naming no names.
We all know
presently.
exactly what you're talking about.
Because they don't like the fact that it's a spontaneous reaction in someone else over which they have no control. They hate that.
Okay.
They like having control. And the idea that people might be laughing at them is something they can't... You can't order someone not to laugh.
Okay, that's
This is getting quite deep, really.
No,
isn't
but
it,
it's a
for
beautiful thought.
lunchtime?
No, but it's important to talk about this because let's go back to Dr. Strangelove. I mean, this was I wasn't around. You weren't around 1963 to know that. Cuban Missile Crisis was about 62. Yeah,
yes.
So we weren't there, but we know from history, which is not far back, that the whole planet was terrorized. This was on the brink. You had Khrushchev, you had Castro, and you had Kennedy, and they were all playing chicken.
Yeah.
And
chicken and chess.
And chess.
Chess with bits of chicken.
Okay. See, this is where you come in. This is what you do.
Okay.
But that's what it was, right? So, and there was terror, and kids were practicing what would happen if the bomb came. They were under their desks.
Under the desks, as if somehow that would protect you. Yeah.
Right. It's like the little whistle on it in case your plane goes down.
Yeah. Would you like a top up of your air? I'll just swim over and top you up, sir.
But with the Cuban Missile Crisis comes Dr. Strangelove and that sense of brinkmanship and panic and global fear.
Yes.
And now the comedy.
Yes, well, it is a funny film.
Yeah.
And it's I was approached by Sean Foley, the director, who I've known for a long time, but we've never actually collaborated together, strangely. And he said, look, we've got the rights to Dr. I'm going to direct it. Would you like to help me write it? And I instantly said yes. As soon as I said yes, I then realised this is one of the most iconic, for me, it's one of the most iconic movies ever made. In terms of the great comedies, dark comedies, it's one of the finest. Stanley Kubrick himself is an amazing director, revered. And what I hadn't appreciated was this is the very first time the Kubrick family and the Kubrick estate have given permission for one of Kubrick's films to be adapted in another medium. So a lot of responsibility there. We didn't announce it for about a year while we quietly got on with the script, but as soon as it was announced and we saw like the world's media look at us, we suddenly realised we've got to make this really good.
Yeah, for
we
sure.
were having fun that year. Now let's look again and now let's make this. So we put a lot of work into it, and we've got Steve Coogan playing. I mean, Sellers played 3 parts in the movie. Steve is actually going to play 4 on stage, which is the challenge, because in the movie, of course, Sellers could do one character one week, do hair and makeup and costume, and film another character the following week. Whereas Steve has to do all 4 live in front of you.
Well, that's
2 of whom are in the same room at the same time.
This I cannot wait to see. I mean, with Steve Coogan, you're straight to go to. I mean, obviously you worked together on Partridge and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So there was no question.
And also, I remember when he started off, and this was about 30 years ago when we were doing the first Partridge in the Day-to-Day. He was being compared to Peter Sellers in terms of his characterizations and so on. And then, you know, he is himself, and as well as Alan, he's done all these other, you know, The Trip and everything. So, but it feels like the role he really should play. And in fact, that was his response, really, which is, I really ought to do this, shouldn't I? And he's doing it. We're doing some previews at the moment just to get it on its feet and watch it. But he's amazing. He's extraordinary. As are the rest of the cast. But it is an extraordinary feat.
So give me a sense then of 1962, and here we are in 2024. History repeating itself and echoes. Is this all very prevalent?
Yes, when we first we were asked to do the adaptation, we kind of thought it felt relevant, but in a kind of apocalyptic way, in that global warming is a big concern. There are wars, there are nuclear weapons still with rogue states and so on, but it felt more like a summing up, a kind of metaphor for what's happening. But now, here we are with it about to officially open, and we've got NATO and Russia staring at each other, talking about nuclear weapons. We've got Israel and Iran talking about nuclear weapons. So actually, it's no longer a metaphor, it's a reality. And somehow, if we could still try and mine a little bit of comedy from that, then great. But it's suddenly become much more relevant and potent a subject to deal with. And I think I'm relieved we're doing it as a comedy, because I think a night of it as a tragedy
Yes.
would be unbearable.
Yes, yeah, and people are leaving going, oh God, I can't take any more. I didn't come for that. Because your take on the political system, I'm thinking of The Thick of It, and then Veep, which I'm now currently rewatching for the third time, as we're in American political.
Yes,
and also the vice presidential election is pretty important this time around in a way it mightn't have been before. Where did that come from? Where you wanted to get kind of through the keyhole and into that advisory kind of stuff, if you know what I mean.
I think it might be going back to that thing of, you're partly inside and you're partly outside.
Your own story.
I've always been at the kind of margins, partly in that I've had a very publicly conventional, Oxford, BBC, that kind of thing. But outwardly, I'm keen to look at it and analyse it and take it apart. Yeah. And my feeling about politics is I just wanted to get behind the mystery of it. What really goes on behind those closed doors. I mean, I grew up on Yes Minister, which actually, if you watch it, still stands, still an amazing show. And that was in the days really before we had cameras in Parliament, and so it really was almost like a documentary, even though it was a traditional sitcom shot in front of an audience. It was the first time I think the general public got an insight into how things happened. And the writers of Yes Minister did say they got stories from ex-officials, civil servants, ministers, advisors, from ministries, under Thatcher and under Callaghan before Thatcher. And so I wanted to do, with The Thick of It, I wanted to do that, but bring it up to date, because it was more about, the great revelation for me when I was researching it is the number of these 24-year-olds who are running the country, these advisors, unelected advisors.
I think Malcolm Tucker called them zygotes at one stage.
Yes.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that he says to Armando Iannucci?
No, I think you're right to ask if I remember, because sometimes I just don't. Someone was doing Alan Partridge as a special subject on Mastermind.
I love it.
And I thought, I'll see if I can. I got 2 right, and she got 7. So
wow. I noticed even on Alistair Campbell's podcast recently, he was talking about with Rory Stewart about The Thick of It, and Rory was asking him, so was that you, Malcolm Tucker, was that you? Did Alistair Campbell come into your mind making that?
Well, I think he likes to think Malcolm was solely him. Malcolm is an amalgam of public versions of himself, but there were lots of nameless ones as well. They were called, and wait for it, the Enforcers, which make it sound like the Dementors from Harry Potter, because they would fan out from Number 10 and go into all the ministries and just basically tell them how much money they've got to spend, what they can spend it on, what they can't spend it on, and what they've got to say. It was very much that control network from Number 10, which Blair and then Brown really kind of brought to a head, and then it stayed that way under Cameron, and then gradually I think it's various prime ministers sometimes loosen it up. I think Keir Starmer is very much just get on with it, I don't want to be bothered by all the details. But it is a mad way to run a country.
It is. Tell me about the script, because I sometimes watching Veep, and it's so sharp and so quick and so funny that I find myself pausing to process just how many insults you've managed to get in 30 seconds or less, and secondly trying to understand some of the profanities, some of which I've never heard before, but I adopt and adapt. So is that the writer's room? Is that some of the actors ad-libbing a little bit? But was it as much fun to write and put together as it is to watch?
I mean, the insults both on Veep and in The Thick of It were always like the fun bit we did at the end of the day.
Oh, really?
If we felt we'd been good.
You treated yourself too.
As a treat, we'd do more Malcolm Tucker insults, or in Veep, Jonah insults.
Oh, Lord Jonah.
But the process is quite organic. It is a written, there's elements of improv done when we shoot it, but fundamentally it's a very, very well worked, detailed script. We tend to break the stories where there's a group of about 8 to 10 of us, and then I give a story to each writer and break it in more detail with them. And I tell them really for the first draft, go away and write it really fast.
Yes.
Because it's all going to change. So don't sweat over every word. Just do it in 2 days, because then you get a kind of structure. You get something physical that you have a script that you can then play with. Even if playing with it is, well, the first half of it really doesn't work, so let's chuck that out. But this second half here, I think that's where the meat of the story is. So let's now expand on it. And then the real work starts. on the breaking it down line by line, and then we all swap and we do a little bit in each other's, then we swap again, so it becomes, I often compare it to like making a good chicken stock, in that you just pour lots of stuff in, boil it down, pour more in, boil it down, more, so you get this kind of densely joked, profane, structured script. And then the job of myself and whoever's directing is to, in the shoot, try and make it not look like it's all written, to make it look like it's really happening.
And that's the win. And sometimes I wonder, some of the insults are so pointed, even at the physicality of an actor, that I sometimes go, oof.
I know. we sometimes, you have a guest actor in who's in that episode and is in for 2 days. And then halfway through the first day, you realise, I haven't given them the talk. Which is, by the way, there will be a constant stream of insults about your physical appearance. I hope you don't mind. And most of them go, yeah, fine, until they're insulted. And they go, do I really look like that?
That's what I was wondering. Like Joe now, you mentioned he's too tall. I mean, that is a gift.
Yeah, sky bother. Is it cloud botherer was one? I mean, most of them are too graphic to say on air, but... yes,
it's constant, and then you look at it. You talk about Stalin, you talk about Dr. Strangelove, you talk about Cuban Missile Crisis, and then we're back into New Labour with in the thick of it. Veep, of course, covers really anything from Sarah Palin beyond, and now we're into the last 10 years of Trump and to an extent Biden and Harris and so forth, where I've spoken to you, would you believe, from afar on this before, briefly on the subject of when satire becomes unsatirizable. Thank you. Because it's too other, and at the moment with him it's too other.
Yes.
Please tell me, what do you do with something like that?
They play into the absurd.
Okay.
Trump specifically, he knows that what he's saying is absurd, but it's an entertainment as far as he's concerned. He's not expecting you to believe him. He's expecting you to admire his playfulness and his wit, if you want to call it that.
Now it's into strange Lovian levels of terrifying.
I know, terrifying. And also, any average episode of The Thick of It or of Veep is usually about the central politician worrying that they've done something wrong and then trying to walk it back before somebody finds out, or make up for it if it has been put out. But now these politicians aren't bothered if they've done something wrong. In fact, they boast about it.
Because it's without consequence, is that it?
Exactly. Yeah. We're in that strange world. And also, because the way social media feeds off misinformation, it means that all of us are immediately suspicious of anything that we see or read. We just don't know anymore.
Or who or what to believe.
What to believe. Yeah. If they really did say that, or is that now AI that's saying that? Not me. I'm an AI, initials wise, but I mean the...
you were ahead of your time, Armando.
I mean the digital threat to our existence.
Yes.
AI. So now we're just, so what do? We just think, do you know what? This is too complicated for me to try and process. So I'm just not going to do that, which is a shame, because it means that we see that whole world of politics as something that's not for the likes of us. We feel detached from it. And yet, as we know, our decisions in elections have real consequences. The referendum for independence in Scotland had real consequences. The Brexit referendum had the major conference. So the way the vote goes in this coming election in America will have massive consequences, given that one candidate is still peddling the story that there is no such thing as climate change. So these are important things. So I'm now more interested in how do we connect people to politics rather than how do we show people how absurd it is. We know how absurd it is.
Yeah, we do, and the connection is maybe there's another project coming, but or Dr. Strangelove helps develop that connection. That's why people will go and see it.
Well, it tells you the reality that can ensue from decisions taken in Washington, Moscow, and near at hand.
Armando, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate you coming. We'll do it for again for longer, because there's lots more places we could go. But tickets for Dr. Strangelove in London and Dublin. You're going to the Bord Gáis Energy Theatre. Well done.
I think February of next year, late January. February of next year.
Great. DrStrangelove.com, the franchise. By the way, we didn't even get a chance to talk about that. So it's a TV show.
I'll come back.
Yeah, please do. That's a good idea. Available to watch on Sky and Now TV. I'll be watching both, and I'll report back to our listeners and indeed our viewers about what Dr. Strangelove, how good it is. But for now, Armando, this is your monthly thank you from the people who love what you do. Thanks for your time today.
I will pocket that.
Virgin Radio.